Please welcome to the stage Simon James Green.
Thank you very much. Hello everyone. And welcome to Gay Club, hooray. I want to start by taking you back in time actually to the mid-90s and telling you the story of how I messed up what should have been the best summer of my teenage years. Picture the scene. It's the end of year 11, GCSEs are over. This long, hot, amazing summer is stretching out in front of me, right? If something fabulous is going to happen, it's going to happen this summer. And if it's going to happen at the house party that I've finally been invited to by the popular kids. Yes, indeed, because he is going to be there, Jamie. Now, I am in complete denial about my sexuality at this point, right? And I'm putting down the fact that I'm thinking about Jamie 24/7, just down to the fact that basically we're really good friends. You know, that is the sole reason. It's got nothing to do with how completely gorgeous he is. No. Nothing to do with his, you know, his perfect deep brown eyes, that lovely hair, that cute little smile he has. No, we're just good friends, you know? The sort of friend that I would rig the voting for the Drama Society elections because I was president, and if I could make sure that he became head of props, it meant that I would have the perfect excuse to spend lots of time with him in the prop store sorting out the props, if you know what I mean, right? As it turned out, nothing did actually happen, sadly, in the prop store, but God, I wanted it to, you know. It turned out, actually, he wasn't even very good with props. In fact, he was crap at them. But it didn't matter because he was hot, so all was forgiven. Anyway, back to the party. So I'm, you know, it's going quite well. I'm chatting with Jamie. I'm laughing along all his little jokes, you know, trying to make a lot of eye contact with him because I've read somewhere that is a great way to send people crazy with passion. You know, so I'm doing all that. Everyone's, you know, drinking the punch, which is one of those affairs that has been made in a kind of plastic washing up bowl. People have just thrown various bits in throughout the night. You know, there's lemonade, there's orange juice, a bit of Ribena, Bacardi, vodka, some Domestos, that sort of stuff, you know. And around about midnight, in this kind of quiet corner of the garden that remarkably no one has puked in yet, Jamie kisses me, and I am surprised, I'm shocked, I'm kind of half wondering if anybody saw what just happened, and then I'm a total idiot because I tell him that I'm not gay. That's what I say. I'm not gay, I say. And Jamie just, he just sort of stands there looking at me, staring, his face kind of slightly screwed up because he's trying to compute this information that I'm apparently not gay. Because let's be clear, right, I was this kid who loved musical theatre, right? I had show posters up all over my bedroom walls. I had loads of really close female friends that I loved nothing more than going shopping with and having a good old bit of a gossip from time to time. Hated football, loved badminton. I was wearing a cravat, for goodness sake, a cravat. I looked like Fred from Scooby-Doo. If you wanted an image of a stereotypical gay boy, it was me, and yet I told him that I was not gay. And then I ran off. And that is how I ruined what should and could have been the most amazing summer of my life, because me and Jamie, well, we never really spoke again after that. And it was only kind of years later I started reflecting about the whole situation and realising it's quite interesting, isn't it, what fear and ignorance can do to you sometimes and how it affects you in ways you just didn't know. And I think to understand what was going on in my head a little bit, you need to know a little bit of LGBT history, actually, which some of you might know about, but some of you might not. But when I was at school in the 90s, we were in the middle of Section 28, which was a piece of legislation the Conservative government at the time had put in place, which effectively banned LGBT books from school libraries. Here is the actual piece of legislation itself, so you can see what it says. So, Section 28 of the 1988 Local Government Act stated, the local authority shall not intentionally promote homosexuality or publish material with the intention of promoting homosexuality, or B, promote the teaching in any maintained school of the acceptability of homosexuality as a pretended family relationship. Horrific wording. Nevertheless, that's what was in place. It was put in place in 1988. It wasn't repealed until 2003 in England. And as you can imagine, it had the effect of leaving loads of us growing up at that time feeling lonely and confused and like we had absolutely nowhere to turn. And lots of young people were taught to feel shame because of it, of course, as well. And many people, straight and gay, came away from that period of time in the 90s and just beyond, feeling that being LGBT was somehow wrong. It must be, because why else have legislation like this designed to protect young people and children from the true horrors of it? And of course, some people growing up then, who are now parents themselves today, still in fact think that as a result of legislation like this, because of course hate and bigotry has a really horrible way of rippling down through the decades. Now, this legislation kind of had its roots in this idea that any discussion of sexuality other than being straight was somehow inappropriate and harmful for young people. And it came out of this kind of moral panic that was going on at the time. So we had kind of newspapers with headlines like this: "Gay sex lessons for Scots schools," says the Daily Record in an outraged headline. And on the right here, "I'd shoot my son if he had AIDS," says Vicar. He would pull the trigger on the rest of his family too. Yes, a shining beacon of Christian love and hope from the Vicar there, very kind. But this is just an example of just, two of the kind of headlines that are around in the kind of the 80s and the 90s, which were just screaming all this kind of nonsense and hate and hysteria about LGBT people. And meanwhile, we had kind of gay celebrities like Freddie Mercury, lead singer of Queen, who died from complications from AIDS in 1992. So it was a really tricky period of time. We had all the tabloid newspapers screaming this hate about LGBT people. We had gay celebrities that we might have looked up to dying. And we had Section 28 in place, which meant that, if you were feeling a little bit confused or you wanted some information or some support or reassurance or anything like that, you couldn't find it because there weren't allowed to be any books in the school library about featuring characters who might be feeling the way that you're feeling. And you also couldn't discuss it with any teachers in your school, either in sex education lessons or anything like that, because they weren't allowed to talk about it either. So loads of us felt really alone and afraid and like we had nowhere to turn to. And that's why when I started writing young adult books about 6 years ago, I really wanted to write these sort of books that I would have loved to have found in the school library when I was at school, and that would have really have helped me. Books that contain characters that were going through similar things to me, bits of advice along the way perhaps as well, but also crucially books which did feature some happy endings for the LGBT characters in them. Which brings me to the book we're talking about today, which is Gay Club. So Gay Club charts the race to be president of a school LGBTQ+ society, or Gay Club as it's known. Now, it's not a very popular club actually. There's only 4 members in it. So Barney is pretty confident he's going to win the vote to be president because 2 of them are his best mates, so they'll definitely vote for him. Until his rival Bronte manages to open up voting to the entire school. So everyone gets a say on who gets to be president of Gay Club, and that is when the gloves really come off and the election campaign gets really quite dirty and backstabbing and bitching really quite fast. So this book is basically full of queer kids being absolutely awful to each other quite a lot of the time, to be honest with you. But then a national organisation is looking for one school LGBT society society to be their kind of national ambassadors for the year. And that's when loads of different gay clubs from all around the UK converge on London for this big kind of youth LGBT conference. And as you can imagine, when you've got several hundred queer kids together in a hotel overnight, things get incredibly messy very fast. And it very soon becomes National Coming Out Day for everybody's secrets. Yes, indeed. So that's the book. Now, all of my previous books, Noah Can't Even, Alex in Wonderland, Heartbreak Boys, they've all featured awkward gay teenage boys. And Gay Club is also told from the point of view of an awkward gay teenage boy, because I think it's important to stick to what I know. But also, out of all of my books, this is probably the most diverse in terms of representation of all the different colours of the LGBT rainbow. So there's actually a lot more representation in this, I think, than any of my other books, which is one of the really great things about writing it. It also turned out to be probably my most political and most topical of books that I'd written so far, actually. And more on that in just a second. But let me tell you about a few of the things that inspired it, first of all. Like all my books, it is funny, and I'm a great believer in the power of comedy in telling a lot of these stories. I think especially when you're dealing with books for young people, and you're approaching subjects some of them might find a little bit tricky to think about or talk about, then humour is actually a really great accessible way into talking about some of those quite tricky topics. And like I told you at the beginning as well, I also really wanted to tell stories of kind of queer joy and happiness with characters that were having a good time. They were living their best lives, and it would hopefully show people that actually, being gay isn't all doom and gloom. And unlike some of perhaps the early stories that we saw, you're not necessarily going to end up dead at the end of the story, right? It's not going to be an unhappy ending where the gay kids, end up killing themselves or having a homophobic attack or anything like that. It's about positivity and joy, and that was really, really important to me. But I think the thing about laughing, and I'm a great believer in laughing at yourself and your life whenever you can, but the thing about that is it's only really possible if you're in a kind of a safe place, and it's okay to do that. Because there's nothing funny about discrimination and hatred. There's nothing funny about homophobic bullying and attacks. And I think I was really conscious when I was writing this book that, I love funny LGBT stories. I've written 6 of them. Great big fan of kind of joyful fairy tale type things. But I think it's also the case that we have to sometimes realise what the reality actually is. And the reality for young people out there today isn't that it's always kind of happiness and joy and unicorns and rainbows all the time, okay? They're facing, really difficult struggles and real problems. And life is far from easy for quite a lot of them that I meet at various LGBT societies in schools when I do school visits. So I really wanted to write a sort of book that kind of reflected some of that a little bit as well. I think it's important. Now, one struggle, of course, is social media outrage. We're all familiar with it. Nobody agrees on anything online. Twitter, especially, is full of the worst of humanity. It's a constant battle, left versus right, culture wars, people quoting things out of context, commenting on things on which they have no knowledge whatsoever, but of course they're an expert. And I wanted the characters in Gay Club to very much be dealing with that as well. I think that's a very modern thing that a lot of young people have to deal with. So I'm going to read you a first little extract from it now, which is where they're dealing with exactly that. Now this comes from about halfway through the election campaign. And Bronte has based her entire election speech to the school on the fact that the school's Twitter account has recently received a homophobic tweet from an anonymous parent who is furious that the school library has some LGBT books in it. So Bronte, quite rightly, has done a great speech about how terrible that is and how it's important to stand up, push back and fight against this sort of censorship. Great. Until it turns out that Bronte did in fact fake the tweet from the parent. She sent it from a sock puppet account on a burner phone, all very dramatic. And Barney's team have found out this is indeed the case, and they've just released the evidence online, which is going to, damn Bronte and completely ruin her chances. Bronte, though, is not taking that lying down, and she, at the beginning of this little extract here, is just about to come back and try and explain herself and make the electorate go back to her again, all being well. So this starts from Bronte's tweet. It has been brought to my attention that the anonymous post about the LGBTQ+ library books was in fact faked by a trusted member of my team. I apologise to everyone I've let down. The team member in question has been let go. I am devastated. I should have checked the source for myself, but am reeling following a recent bereavement. The truth is, I have barely been holding it together these last few days, and I don't know how much more heartbreak I can take. I'm so sorry. B. Maya simply has an "I fucking told you so" look on her face. Well, what bereavement? Is that real, I ask? Who's died? No one's died, Maya snaps. This is classic Bronte. It's for sympathy and to distract everyone from the real issue. She leans into me. Do not fall for this crap. Damn it, George hisses. You see, this is the clever thing. She's blaming it on a member of her team. She knows we have the audio confession, but if we leak that, we're going to look like the arseholes since she's apparently grieving. There's a tiny chance someone really has died, but regardless, we can't question it, and it's not going to look good if we keep hammering on about Bronte's fake tweet. She's deflected all this, and unless we can prove it isn't true... Paxton frowns. Would she really try to deflect one lie with another lie? Maya laughs. I wholeheartedly believe she would kill to get what she wants. What do a few lies matter? George is scrolling through her Twitter. You see, she's already getting replies, people sending their love, thinking about her, blah, blah. Is anyone talking about her lies and duplicity? George shakes his head, and I throw my hands up in the air. Literally, at this point in the game, I don't know what to think or do anymore. Who is Piggles? George asks. Ugh, it's her stupid guinea pig, Maya says. She raises her eyebrows. Is that who it is? That's the bereavement. Piggles is dead. George nods. Apparently. Someone just tweeted to say that Piggles was such a sweet soul. I laugh. Oh my actual, this is ridiculous. We're not allowing a period of mourning for a guinea pig. I look between George, Maya and Pax, who all have concerned expressions on their faces. We're not. We can't. Can we? We are. You need to tweet your condolences, George tells me. Really? Do it. You're so sorry, thinking of her, sending love, thoughts and prayers, etc. Don't want to be seen as heartless, George explains. Well, I'm not heartless. Exactly. And this is the moment to temporarily bury the hatchet and offer a crumb of compassion to Bronte and her most likely fake dead guinea pig. If it's not dead, it probably will be soon, Maya mutters darkly. I'm on my phone. OK, so I'm putting "so sorry for your tragic loss," thinking of you and beautiful Piggles, and then a broken heart emoji and a crying face. Too much, George says. Might come across as sarcastic. I look up from my screen. Well, could the whole thing be interpreted that way? Maybe I should delete tragic in that case. Sorry to hear this, Maya offers. Sorry to hear this sad news, George adds, because... yeah, tragic is a bit OTT, right? It's not a massacre, it's a dead rodent. Are they rodents, I ask? Well, what did you think they were? Well, I don't know, like a type of mini pig, I guess. Oh, don't be ridiculous, Barney, George says. How about just a simple thinking of you? I say, is that a bit dismissive almost? Maya nods. Yeah, you see, that's the bare minimum response, right? Thinking of you, but not even sorry. She won't like that. She's all about the drama, that girl. George looks down at his phone again and sighs. You see, there's a lot of responses to this already, all pretty similar. We need to come up with something more unique for you. You can't just parrot off the same meaningless platitude as everybody else. What about a quote? I squirt my face. About dead guinea pigs. Maya looks up from Googling. They may be small, but guinea pigs leave an enormous paw print on your heart. This is actually a graphic. You could attach it to the tweet. OK, I say, hammering out a new tweet. So that, and then maybe, Piggles was so beautiful, he'll be sorely missed. He, Maya says. She, I reply. Maya shrugs. George groans. Ugh, the last thing we need in this late stage of the campaign is you blundering around, misgendering a guinea pig. They, use they, they'll be sorely missed. Do you know what? I say, screw it. We're in the right here. We shouldn't let this obvious tactic, this conveniently dead rodent, get in the way of the real story. Bronte lied about a homophobic hate campaign. Surely the electorate aren't so stupid they won't be able to see that, right? I nod at everyone. We leave it. We rise above it. Let it run its course. And tomorrow, we sweep to victory. Here we go. That's a little bit of, thank you. A little bit of Gay Club. So, really, Gay Club is a love letter, I suppose, to the students of the LGBT societies I've met over the last few years. Because what I've seen when I've met them is young people who are really passionate about change, about making the world a better place and kind of fighting for justice. So in a lot of ways, this book is for them. I think everybody should be able to see themselves in the pages of a book. It's just a really basic thing that makes the world a better place. Seeing yourself is comforting, it's reassuring. It lets you know that you're not alone, that other people are going through similar things to what you're going through. And I think the reason why I had such an issue coming out as a teenager was because my only points of reference were really negative, you know. If all you see is the newspapers screaming that gay people are awful, and all you see in the news is gay people dying, then you start to think, well, if that's what I am, then my life is going to be awful. And you say to yourself, well, I did, I don't want to be that person, I don't want to be gay, so you try to deny it. But of course, ultimately, you can't really hide who you are. It just makes you even more unhappy. You know, it's important to see positive, great representation in books. Everybody needs their heroes, and everybody deserves one. But also, I think it's really important, actually, regardless of how you identify what your sexuality might be, to read about other people who are not like you. I think it's a great thing for everybody to put themselves in someone else's shoes, understand a little bit about what life is like for them and what they are going through. Ultimately, that can only make the world a better place. The whole point, surely, of kind of education isn't just to teach people, you know, how to read and write or how to do quadratic equations and stuff like that. It's about, you know, making people into well-rounded, kind of global citizens who are ready to kind of take their place in a diverse world. A world where they're going to meet all sorts of different people with all sorts of different backgrounds who identify in all sorts of different ways. So really important, I think, to understand what makes those people tick, and what better place to do it within the pages of a book. And ultimately, you know, when it comes down to it, when it really boils down to it, I think we're all a lot more the same, a lot more similar than a lot of people first think. I remember in year 9 when I fell in love for the first time. Ah, yes, that's right. Well, I thought it was love, although looking back, it possibly is borderline stalking. But I'll tell you the story. So no, his name was Tom. Tom wasn't really called Tom, his name was Ben, but we'll call him Tom to protect his privacy for the purposes of this event and broadcast. But no, I loved Tom. I would follow that boy around at break times and at lunch like a little sort of lost puppy, very pathetic, kind of walking a few metres behind him as he walked around with his mates, just hoping that he would, you know, turn round and maybe notice me. But he never did. Until one day. And it was around the time of Poppy Day. And I was wearing my little poppy in my blazer. And one lunchtime, Tom aggressively strode up to me, grabbed the poppy out of my blazer, and just scrunched it up in his hand. Very shocking. But no, I thought this was a good sign because I'd recently read a magazine article that said if a boy is mean to you, it means he probably likes you, right? So I thought this was great, and it meant things were definitely going to be happening with me and Tom. Cut to the following week, and the French exchange students turn up. Now, the idea is they're spending a couple of weeks living with local families, soaking up a bit of British culture for what it's worth, right? And Tom starts getting really friendly with this French girl called Claudette. Now, Claudette she's very glamorous, she's very beautiful, she's clearly very intelligent, and it's obvious that Tom really likes her. you know. He keeps sort of sidling up to her, practicing his GCSE French in order to impress her, you know, sort of, oh, bonjour, Claudette, ça va, and all this kind of nonsense. Really winds me up, you know. I start seeing them hanging around together. They're walking around at lunchtime holding hands on the field. There's a rumour about them snogging behind the sports hall. Right? I'm devastated by this point, right? But all was not lost, because it was recently my birthday, and my friend Katie had bought me a birthday present. And it was a spell kit, where you could literally cast a spell to make a boy like you. So this seemed like the next logical step in my campaign to win the affections of Tom. So got the spell kit out. So there's a candle inside. You write the boy's name on a bit of paper, mystical crystals you have to scatter around the candle, and then you basically burn the name kind of in the flame while chanting the magical spell contained in the pamphlet within. Well, that didn't work either, let me tell you. The only thing, in fact, that was achieved is my mum thought I'd become involved in devil worshipping, possibly some kind of drugs, hard to know, right? But this is the point. Gay or straight, life is a roller coaster, right? And this whole process of growing up and going through secondary school and liking someone and them not liking you back and being awkward and embarrassing and humiliating yourself in massive ways, I think that's something that everybody goes through, just in slightly different ways. And ultimately, I hope that if anybody picks up one of my books, that is what they realise. And that ultimately, we all just want the same thing, which is basically just to live our lives in peace and love who we love and be who we are and be happy with that. And not have people tell you that it's not possible or that it's a bad or wrong thing. And to live our lives without judgment and without fear, ultimately. But I think, your experience of being LGBT, both as an adult and at school, very much depends, obviously, on where you are. Both, obviously where you are in the world. There are some countries where, it's still illegal to be gay, for example. But also, even in countries which, you might think are quite liberal and where have made sort of good strides with LGBT rights, it turns out that's often not the case. When I was writing Gay Club, which was last summer, actually, I was kind of aware of this kind of growing tide of anti-LGBT kind of sentiment that was going on, mainly online, admittedly. But it was just there, bubbling away in the background. And a lot of it began, actually, as kind of transphobic abuse. And I remember at the time, a lot of my trans friends saying, it's not going to stop with us, it's going to expand into the rest of the LGBT community. And actually cut to, 12 months later, they were absolutely right. And it horrified me when I first started seeing this stuff happening online, because I naively thought that we'd made progress and that somehow we'd kind of won the battle of hearts and minds and people were now thinking it's fine to be LGBT. And actually it turns out that people who have always resented the community have been lurking, kind of in the background. And they've been emboldened, I think, in recent months to come out of the woodwork and to start expressing their hate. A lot more vocally, which is a horrifying thing. We're now seeing LGBT people routinely described as groomers online, for example, particularly LGBT authors and anyone talking about being LGBT in schools. They regularly get that insult hurled at them. Rhetoric last heard in the 80s and 90s that I remember, in news headlines about LGBT stuff being inappropriate for young people and for schools, and won't somebody think of the children and all that kind of stuff, has made a comeback, and people are literally saying it again even now. In the US, as you might be aware, there are currently hundreds of book bans going on in various states, predominantly targeting LGBT books to get them out of school libraries. You've got states like Florida who introduced the Don't Say Gay bill, where you basically can't talk about being LGBT in lessons with young people. So again, like a version of our Section 28 from years ago. And you might think it perhaps couldn't happen here in the UK. But sadly, that is not the case. Let's look at this headline: gay author banned from speaking at Catholic school. I wonder who that could be about. So yes, a few months ago, I was due to go and give a talk about my LGBT books at an all-boys school down in Croydon, which happened to be Catholic, although I didn't know that at the time when I took the booking. And it was just one of my regular events. The school, the librarian there was really excited for me to go along. The school, the headmaster, the teachers were really excited, thought it was going to be a great thing. Some good positive LGBT representation. And a lot of the governors were in favour of it as well. Until the Catholic Archdiocese of Southwark put a stop to the visit. And their initial reason for doing so was that they felt that the content of the books, i.e. the LGBT content, and me being gay, was not in keeping with, basically, with Catholic teachings, was essentially what their issue was. Now, the story blew up massively. And it was featured in almost all of the broadsheet newspapers and also on ITV and BBC as well. Lots of kind of articles like this talking about it. It was unfortunately picked up by a kind of quite right-wing Catholic website called Catholic Truth, which led a campaign. You can see here they talk about it. They were concerned that boys are misled into accepting as normal and good sexual behaviour which is condemned by Christ's church. Marvellous. Meanwhile, they saw fit to send their followers after me and send me a ton of abuse on social media and some lovely emails saying that I would die and burn in hell. Because God loves nothing more than a death threat, of course. Very popular. So we've got here the school's chaplain, Father James Clark, who says that the books are not in line with Catholic education, contrary to the ethos of the church, and the event has caused scandal in the local area, no less. So it was all very dramatic. It was upsetting, right? But honestly, this sort of stuff doesn't, it doesn't affect me on any kind of major level. What most upset me was the idea of the boys in this school. And the effect it would have had on them, because of course they were all aware of what was going on. You know, a lot of them were on social media. It was all over Instagram as well. They read the news, right? So imagine the message that gives. You know, that what you might be, who you are, is considered so horrible and deeply inappropriate by the people responsible for your education. So. One positive thing that came out of it, though, is the amount of kind of letters of support and postcards and messages, and tweets from young people in schools all around the country, particularly ones who belong to LGBT societies, who'd heard about this, who were told about it in their lessons and library lessons and classes, and who wrote offering their support. And some of them made leaflets and banners, and they wanted to sort of protest about it and stand up for it, which was a really inspirational thing and something that was really a really positive thing, I think, that came out of the whole situation. But I really think it's important to push back against this sort of thing. We currently do have this kind of this group of people. From what I can see, they're mainly sort of evangelical religious types on the right, basically, who seem intent on pushing us back to the Dark Ages, effectively, and want to sort of ruin all the progress we've made. And I think it's really important. In the book, George, who is Barney's campaign manager, loves nothing more than kind of taking down the arguments of bigots and homophobes and transphobes. And I think it's really important to consider some of the arguments these people use and look at why they are wrong. One thing that came out of this quite a lot was the idea that if a young person was to read an LGBT book, so a book, you know, featuring, let's say, a gay character, a gay storyline, that they might in fact be inspired to be gay themselves. Right? I had that so many times, it's beyond belief. The idea that some 13-year-old would pick up a book and read it and go, oh, this looks like a fun story of difficulty and homophobia and bullying and grief. I know, I think I'll be gay too, is plainly ridiculous. This idea that you know, a book can simply change who you are in that way is plainly ridiculous. You know, the only thing that is going to make you gay is if you are in fact gay. That's how it works, right? You can't suddenly become it, even if you wanted to be. I love the idea, you know, that books are potentially that powerful, you know, but how ridiculous, you know. I read about the Second World War in history at school, but I wasn't inspired to invade Poland as a result. reading or watching that sort of media could change your sexuality, then I would surely be straight, because growing up, I saw nothing but Disney movies featuring princes falling in love with princesses and all that type of thing. And yet it had no effect on me. So nothing is going to turn you LGBT. But I think also kind of implicit within that is this idea that actually it would be such a bad thing anyway. Like there's this automatic assumption that it's something that you wouldn't want to be. And you know, this father, whatever he calls himself, clown, who talks about the fact that, you know, it's a sordid lifestyle he keeps going on about. You know, the idea, you know, that my life is sordid, let me tell you, you know, basically, you know, my life revolves around cooking, walking my dogs, and trying to work out why my bagless vacuum cleaner's lost suction. You know, that's not sordid, in my opinion. Tragic, possibly, yes, but definitely not sordid. But that also leads into the kind of the next claim that these types of people talk about, which is the idea that somehow it's age inappropriate, you know, to talk about being LGBT in schools. And what they tend to do is then quote some nice out of context bits of the book to try and justify that claim. Typically sections involving sex or swearing, you know. So really bad stuff. I think, first of all, if you think that a book simply featuring gay characters is inappropriate, then you simply have to accept that, that straight characters shouldn't be in books either. Otherwise, it's simple homophobia and getting the sea, as far as I'm concerned. But coming back to the sex and swearing issue, you know, I don't think that discussions about sex and sexuality are a bad thing, you know. That's not the stuff that hurts people. You know, honest, open, mature conversations about sex and sexuality are a great thing for everybody to engage with. It's not talking about it where the harm comes into play, because it's the not talking that results in shame and fear and ignorance. And those are the things that really hurt people, especially young people, I think. And certainly not knowledge and understanding and acceptance. But also, you know, yes, books do contain, and quite often young adult books will contain, sex and swearing in them. But when I hear people complaining that YA books are obscene, all I'm really hearing is that that person doesn't really understand what it's like to be a young person today, and they don't understand the things they hear in school, in the corridors, in the playground, walking home from school. They don't get it, you know. They seem to think that young people are living in this kind of famous five type of world, where all they want to really read about is bike rides and picnics, and that sort of thing. And I think if books don't reflect the reality of being a young person in Britain today, then why on earth would any young person pick the book up? You know, why is it going to speak to them if they can't recognise their lives and the way they talk with their friends and the things they are thinking about? If it doesn't reflect any of that, then the book will, of course, be meaningless. So I think it's really important that some books do contain that sort of information. And ultimately, why go after books anyway? You know, there's genuine harm lurking in the dark corners of the internet, as we all know. And that's where the real danger is, of course, in these situations. The great thing with a book is that, generally speaking, they're put together by people who really care about the content and about their audience. They go through a rigorous editorial process to make sure that, you know, they tell the story in the best way and in a way that is not harmful to the reader as well. And, you know, they are put in school libraries by librarians who know their students really well and know which book might be right for which kid at which particular moment in their life. And best of all, you know, if that young person does then want to read the book in school, they then have someone they can talk to about it if they want to, which is a really important thing. So, ridiculous to focus and target that hatred towards books. But, you know, at the end of the day, if you don't want to read a book like that, the great news is you don't have to, in fact. That's the thing, right? No one is forcing anybody to read these books. They're just sitting on shelves in libraries ready to be discovered if they want to be, if the person is right for them. What always staggers me about these book ban situations is you have a group of parents saying, I don't want my child reading this book, and therefore no other child in this school is going to read the book either, because I am right and everyone else is wrong. I think that's a terrible thing. It's terrible that we listen to a small number of people who think that. If that's what they want, then fine. You know, withdraw your kid from sex education. Tell the librarian they're not allowed to borrow any YA books. You know, if that's really what you think is the best way of bringing up your kid, then you go for it. But you shouldn't be able to have a situation where that can impact everybody else, and where that means that nobody else can read the book either. Ultimately, as an author, my job really is just to hold a mirror up to the world and reflect reality as best I can. And I think, you know, rather than be outraged at the contents of a book, particularly an LGBT book, why not be outraged at a world which lets such terrible things happen to gay kids up and down the country all the time? Because that's what's really disgusting here, and that's the thing that really needs addressing. Because if it's not addressed, things get worse, and that is when hate grows and we end up with tragedy. Tragedy like this, and this was a news story from a little while ago about a 12-year-old boy who committed suicide after incessant anti-LGBTQ+ bullying. During an inquest at Exeter's County Hall, it was revealed that months before the incident, Riley had been questioning his sexuality. His mother described him as a gentle, caring boy who had a hard time fitting in to large groups. She went on to say the bullying started when he entered year 7. And according to the report from Devon Live up there, Riley had been harassed in the local park, pushed in the school corridors and kicked into a road. He was afraid to go to school and the local park in fear of being bullied, she explained. So you see, that is where hate and ignorance leads. It leads to kids who aren't even teenagers yet, feeling they have no choice but to kill themselves because they can't take it anymore. So when things like this are happening, when you have this happening to kids in year 7, when you have kids in primary schools using homophobic slurs in the playground as young as like year 5, sometimes year 4, don't tell me that children are too young to know about LGBT issues, because that's definitely not the case. So, what can we do? The message, ultimately, of Gay Club is that when discrimination is rife, we are better off all standing together. And whether you're LGBT yourself or an ally who just wants to live in a world where, you know, people enjoy freedom and happiness and we can all get along, I think it's important to not be a bystander. You can't be someone who just lets it go and doesn't do anything. In the US right now, lots of members of Generation Z are banding together, taking on challenges, campaigning, being activists, trying to make the world a better, fairer place. And I think it's a really important thing. I'm going to read you one little extract from Barney's election speech here, which kind of links in with that and kind of ties into this idea of people working together for a greater good. The LGBTQ+ society is everything to me. I don't say that lightly, it's everything. I spent my first 3.5 years at this school scared of who I was, frightened and lonely. In the LGBTQ+ society, I found a community. I found people who didn't judge me, a place where I felt safe, somewhere I could be myself, and that was okay. No one would bully me or abuse me or make me feel like I was an outsider. But why does it have to be like that? Why do I have to have a special club to have that acceptance and feel that way? Why can't my safe, happy community be with all of you every day of the week? Not just for half an hour on Wednesday lunchtimes. A lot of us go and support the football team in the big matches. We show up for the athletics and the orchestra and the school musical. Can't we all support the LGBT society too? Even if, like me with the 200-metre sprint, it's not entirely your thing and you think we've nothing in common with those in it. Let me tell you a story I think we could learn a bit of a lesson from. In the 1970s, a lot of feminists were accused of being lesbians, and some feminists thought this damaged their cause. Lesbians were described as the Lavender Menace and were excluded from the Second Congress to Unite Women in New York. But a bunch of them turned up anyway. infiltrating the meeting and standing up, ripping open their shirts to reveal Lavender Menace t-shirts underneath. They made space for themselves, demanded to be heard, and after talks and workshops, which the Lavender Menace facilitated, most people realised they had more in common than that which divided them. Well, in the process, the insult Lavender Menace was reclaimed, and meanwhile, members were told to confirm, never deny, if people accused them of being lesbians. Well, think about that. What if we did that? When people say, oh, that's so gay, or you're so gay, what if the reaction at our school was always, but I am gay? When that statement no longer has emotional power, we'll have succeeded in making change, making this a truly inclusive school. And folks, according to a recent survey of our generation, only 48% of 13 to 20-year-olds identified as exclusively heterosexual. That's right. 52% of us, that's the majority of us, are at least a little bit gay. And let's be real, those stats are probably on the conservative side because admitting it still has so much stigma for some people. So the real figures will probably be higher. Seems to me it's perfectly right we should all be in the LGBT society. But even if you're not just a teeny tiny bit queer, I still want your support. I want you as a member. Because if we all belong, if we all see, just like the Lavender Menace lesbians, that there's more that unites us than separates us, then we've removed all the stigma and we can be one big, happy family. Here for one another, looking out for one another, supporting each other. Our LGBTQ plus society shouldn't just be a club that meets once a week, because being LGBT and accepting LGBT people shouldn't just happen once a week. We should be free to be ourselves and accepted for ourselves 24/7. The LGBT society is all of us, every day, everywhere. So here's my gay agenda. We're all voting for this, right? So let's make the whole school the gay club. And that's what he ends up doing. So, thank you. Challenge homophobic banter in your schools or your workplaces. Push back against book censorship. Be as visible as you feel able. Like, retweet and show support when stuff kicks off online. Stand up for equality and acceptance. I think it's hard sometimes as individuals to feel like you can make an impact, but I think whoever you are, whatever walk of life you're from, everyone can do their little bit. You know, champion inclusivity in your school or workplace. Campaign, help run a pride event. As soon as you're old enough, get out there and vote for politicians that will actually do something positive and make a change and support the community. To me, this all boils down to people just wanting to live their lives, you know, to be who they are and love who they love. We are stronger together. So whatever you do, whatever way this works for you, in or out, gay or straight, loud and proud, quiet or questioning, it doesn't matter, because there's no one way to do this. And there's no right way to do this. All that really matters, like Barney says at the end of the book, is that you join us. Let's build a future that is open, accepting, and kind, and have fun doing it. Thank you. We have time, I think, for a few questions, if anybody has anything they'd like to ask about anything I've spoken about, or indeed anything else. Here we have one. The roving mic is coming up to you.
Thanks, Simon. Is it on? Yeah, it's on. Scott from Pride in Luton. I just wondered, well, thanks for your speech. I, like you, grew up in Section 28. I, too, went to a Catholic school where, yeah, we had nuns telling us, well, they didn't tell us anything. I think that was part of the issue.
Yeah.
Your message, I think, is really, really powerful. And in Luton this year, we held our first ever Pride in June, what was amazing, in this very building, actually, what was fantastic. And I think for our young people, it's key that they see things like this, Heartstopper, Love Victor, you know, all of these amazing pieces of media going on. What can everyone in this room do? I know you've just said it, but what can everyone in this room do, those who are watching online, do to influence our local authorities, our politicians, to actually make sure we don't return to that Section 28? With Suella Braverman, now as Home Secretary, you know, who's saying today even the police should stop at worrying about EDI and actually getting back onto fighting crime.
Yeah.
Well, actually, the crimes are being committed against LGBTQ plus people as well. It doesn't get reported in Bedfordshire because they don't do anything about it. We're tackling that with the police now. So what can everyone in this room, what would your message be for everyone in this room, everyone online, what we could do to influence our politicians?
I think a big part of it, like I was saying, is about being vocal. It's about standing up, I think, and being counted, you know, and not just letting it happen and doing nothing about it. So like I was saying, you know, everyone's in a different position, I think, in terms of how visible they can be and how loud they're prepared to be. And as we know, if you stick your head above the parapet, particularly online, you can get a lot of abuse thrown your way very quickly. And I understand that not everybody's in a place where they can deal with that and handle it, absolutely. But I think what people can do is definitely, I mean, in the online space, definitely, they can support LGBT organisations. Like I said, retweet and like things, add your voice to that conversation. I think ultimately, one thing I saw this summer, which was really great, we had loads of protests about Drag Queen Story Hour all over the country, right? Where lots of these groups, right-wing groups, you know, would protest outside libraries, where members of the public had booked of their own accord to go and see something they wanted to see. Like, nobody's being dragged to Drag Queen Story Hour, right? No one's being forced to sit there and listen to a drag queen read a picture book. Although I have to say, you know, I would highly recommend it. It's great. But you know, and what I saw that was really great was actually members of the LGBT community and their allies forming counter-protests. You know, they were on the street. They were, you know, they were facing off these people, and they were actually, you know, drowning out their hateful messages. And you know, I'm reminded that a lot of the progress we made, you know, in the earlier years in terms of LGBT rights was, I'm afraid, literally about people on the street doing things. You know, they were having protests. They were, you know, back in the Stonewall riots in New York, throwing the bricks, you know, and that kind of thing. And I think sometimes it does come down to doing that as well. It's about being that sense of that, having that visibility and actually standing up and going out there and saying this is wrong and I'm going to stand up for it. I think it's really important to support LGBT events when they happen. So, you know, going along to Drag Queen Story Hour, regardless of the protest outside, and supporting those other forms of media, so the books. Librarians and school libraries are absolutely at the forefront of that as well. And I think it's important that people don't get scared. I think fear is a really terrible thing, and what I know that there are people out there who, you know, they shy away perhaps from stocking certain LGBT books in a library because they don't want any repercussions from it. And that's been happening a lot. I've heard a lot of US librarians saying that, for example, that actually, you know, it's kind of soft censorship going on. So they won't stock the book at all because they don't want a big fuss from the parents. And that's just as bad. That's letting the bigots win, you know. It's really important that we stand firm, stand together, and, you know, we don't let this rhetoric get to us. You know, no one likes being accused of being a groomer, for goodness sake, obviously. And that's what they're saying, you know. And it's a horrible thing. And I can understand why people want to shy away from that. But ultimately, the only way of facing this down is to stand up there, be brave and be proud about it, and not shy away, I think.
Any other questions? I can just pass the mic, I don't have to. I've actually got one. It's not about the topic of the evening. It's about one of your other books.
Oh, is it? Okay.
It's about Alice in Wonderland.
Oh, right.
And I wondered what the fascination, and I've got it, and I think loads of us have, seaside towns that are on the wane. It's just something so wonderful and exciting about
Yeah,
them.
there is. If you don't know Alice in Wonderland is a kind of goofy seaside rom-com, which takes place in one of those dreadful seaside amusement arcades. I say dreadful, I mean, you know, there's a sort of place where you turn up and just end up spending 50 quid, right? Because you know, want to use all the machines and they're great. I don't know really. I've always had a bit of a fascination with those sorts of places, and with the kind of the sort of trickery involved sometimes in those amusement arcades, and the ways they get you to part with your cash during the course of your stay there. So this, yeah, I mean, I spent a lot of, a number of years of my childhood in kind of really grim holidays on the Lincolnshire coast, Cleethorpes, Skegness, Mablethorpe, that sort of thing, and because I lived in Lincolnshire, so so those sorts of places will always have a special place in my heart.
It's in Morrissey songs, it's in all sorts of different places that kind of fall into pieces.
Yeah.
End of the pier kind of dreadfulness.
Like so much of the UK.
Well, there you go. There you go. Cool. Anyone else? No. Cool. Hang on, I have got some other stuff written down because we've got a few minutes left and it'd be a shame to waste them. Where's my book? See, so much of what was in here you've sort of covered. I was going to ask you about why openness and kindness are so vital. I've done that. Talking about the difference between... that might work. So what do you see when you speak to young people now, the differences, particularly with reference to social media and stuff like that, between your experiences as a teenager and current experiences as a teenager, particularly with like stuff being off the record?
Well, I mean, I have to say, I mean, when I was at school in the 90s, I mean, it wasn't spoken about really, beyond abuse in the corridors, and so it wasn't even a thing. What it has been refreshing in the last few years in all the schools I've been into is just the openness of the young people I'm talking to, and how so many of them are just are really happy to listen and engage and talk and want to change and want to make things better. I'm not saying that's true of all young people. You always meet a small handful who are resistant to it. But I think we've, as a community, we've done a lot of work to change minds and hearts and make it a better place. There's still a long way to go. I mean, the LGBT young people I meet still talk about how they do get abused in the corridors. They do still get told you're so gay and all that kind of stuff. It still goes on. And a lot of their experiences are really variable across the country. I think that's a big issue. Some schools are fantastic with their LGBT stuff. They do loads of events. They celebrate LGBT History Week month. They celebrate Pride. Others do barely anything. And I think there is a big issue with that, certainly, because we know that every school in the country will have LGBT students in it. But the fact is their experiences and the support they get is too often just left to depend on kind of local factors rather than there being anything kind of overriding it, which tells schools they have to support it. As I saw, because I basically wanted to visit or was asked to visit a faith school, basically, and it turns out that actually there seems to be very little the Department of Education can actually do when faith schools decide, or some decide, that they are not going to tolerate a visit. And I should say it's only some, because I've been to other faith schools who have been very open and very accepting, and who've embraced the entire thing and don't have an issue with it whatsoever. So I think it's alarming how the experiences can be really variable from place to place. But hey, we need something to work on, don't we? So there certainly is there. And I just hope, as a sort of final note, really, that the stuff we're seeing at the minute, I think that is quite scary, and I think whatever happens in the US does tend to bubble over here eventually, and I think we are seeing that beginning to happen. I think we might have a little bit of a battle, if I'm honest, in the next couple of years. I think we will probably start to see some more sort of book challenges and that kind of thing with LGBT books in libraries again. I think it's really important we learn from history. We learn, how bad Section 28 was, what a terrible, terrible effect it had on so many people, straight and gay, and we don't ever, ever return to that very dark place. Our young people deserve better, and we have to make sure we fight for that better world. Thank you.
Well, thank you once again to Simon James Green.